What's up, guys? As you know, there's going to be a YCS coming up in Anaheim, in Peru, in Lille, and also in Sao Paulo, I believe. So 4 YCSs coming up at the end of October, or no, at the end of September, leading all the way into October. So, of course, I figured I'd give you guys my thoughts on what I think are some of the top decks for the YCS. And, of course, if you guys are grinding regionals or locals, then I also have some decks that I think are in that category as well. But if you guys are interested in trying to explore the new format with myself, Jib, Nesh, or even Lund, you guys can check out the description box below to join the inner circle where we discuss the upcoming format and then plan out how to tackle it to hopefully help you guys achieve your competitive goals. If you guys are interested in that, definitely check that out in the description box below. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into the tier list. So I have basically 4 different tiers. I have top 8 of a YCS, which I think is the goal for many competitive duelists, right? So if I think that deck is strong enough, consistent enough, powerful enough to be making it to all the way to the top 8 of the YCS, I'll put it in that category. Top 64/32, depending on where you're at, is gonna be it's gonna be like more so. I think that it has the potential to do really well, but it's gonna probably fall short 1 or 2 rounds, right? Because of the new top cut rules, we're gonna have definitely less rogue making it into the top cut of an event. So that's kind of like where I put it, like tier 2 decks per se. And then I'm gonna have basically regional decks that I think are really cool, but I don't think they're necessarily YCS competitive. But it would be something that I would personally take to a regional, even or a deck that I think is like, if you take it to a regional, it's lower stakes, it's a lot chiller, and something that if you enjoyed the deck, then definitely consider taking there. And then there's locals decks I think that most likely you're gonna be sticking to the local area. I don't really think this deck is that good. I think you'll probably be able to top locals every now and then, but it's gonna definitely fall short at like more competitive tournaments, in my opinion. Maybe you'll sneak in here or there, but it's definitely for like some of the decks that just aren't that great, in my opinion. But a cool, fun option that you could just play. That's kind of that's chill, So starting off with Crystron K9, I think this deck, in my opinion, is going to be top 64 of YCS. The reason why is because I think the deck lost a lot of consistency in order to special summons. It does get Naroi, but because you're just, you're getting more normal summons, which, in my opinion, you're gonna have to add Smigers. You're gonna have to add Smigers to replace the consistency of, the Crystron spell being limited. So I think this deck is gonna lose some consistency. It also lost Paradise Smasher, which was, in my opinion, one of the main win cons for this strategy. But I think that without these cards now, then it's going to be kind of a little bit harder. So I think it's going to be probably top 64 of a YCS. The deck is still definitely really good. Definitely a deck I can see doing well at a YCS. But I think if you were to average out and group out all the people playing this deck, it's going to be, I think, on average, a top 64 YCS appearance, which is still, by the way, not a bad thing by any means. Being able to make that far and go X3 or X4 out of YCS is so quite competitive, quite insane in my opinion. So yeah, I'll put it right there. Yummy, I think, is marked to be one of the strongest decks of the upcoming format. It makes no brainer. It has the consistency to play multiple rounds, doing the same thing every round. And when you're playing at a YCS, you want a deck that does that, a deck that can do everything, or not do everything, but do the same thing consistently. And I think this deck is definitely one of that. It's a very interactive deck, and it has ways to combat the meta depending on what you expect to play against because of how many non-engine spots it has. So I would personally put Yummy into the top tier of this deck list, or this tier list for sure. And it's something that I think that if we were to imagine in the future what a YCS top 8 look like, I can't imagine a world where Yummy doesn't make it into top 8. That's why I put it here. Lunalight, I think you're going to need to be a really strong pilot with this deck to make it a top 8 of YCS with it. But I do think this deck has a lot going for it, because if a lot of people adapt a board breaker strategy in the current format, Lunalight will be able to run away unscathed because of the fact that it puts up a Liger Dancer, which is very hard to out in the current format for a lot of strategies, at least engine-wise, right? So the deck capitalizes on board breakers, so it's almost kind of like if people think that breakers are going to Yummy, one of the ways that people kind of metagame the situation is to then play maybe a Lunalight deck, because people are gonna have a bunch of breakers, but then you summon a towers and your opponent scoops, right? We literally saw at the World Championship how I think every time I see Tom summon a Liger Dancer, the opponent just immediately concedes and go to the next, right? Yugioh, I think is also capable of doing really well at a YCS. I think the deck reminds me a lot of, it's just like a very like low to the floor deck. It doesn't really have a high ceiling per se, but I would say that the deck is really good at being able to fit it on non-engine, and it's one of the archetypes with an in-engine hand trap that's so relevant in the game, like 5 mana. So I think that this deck, because it has 5 mana and has a lot of non-engine spots, and the fact that it's a really good, in my opinion, a really good deck to counter like Yummy, even Lunalight, because of how many hand traps it plays, or I think it could actually be a really good deck to play for a YCS, and really good deck to probably make it a top 8 of a YCS for sure. It definitely falls. It has the same problem as Yummy, where Yugioh and Yummy, when these decks become the quote-unquote best deck of the format, or strong decks of the format, people will tech cards to beat them. And I think like the reason why Yugioh and Yummy were so good last format is because a lot of people kind of ignore these decks in their deck building process. But now I think definitely this is something that I think these two decks are now a lot better for sure. Zodiac locals deck, in my opinion, I think like the extra copies of Dryden or Dryden going to 1 with like, 3 more barrages doesn't really change much for the deck. I think Detonator just power crept this card so much that I think it's more of a locals deck. It's a fun deck. If you enjoy playing Zoo, then definitely something you would consider taking. Labyrinth is a deck that I think is always going to be like kind of a regional deck. I always see it like, randomly pop up in the regional toppling list every now and then. And I think it's just because the deck is, a trap deck, which a lot of people are not really prepared for. A lot of lightning storms, not really a lot of lightning storms or anything along those sorts. But I do think that people might consider playing Bell now just to like answer Yummy, and maybe Yugioh and stuff, which means Labyrinth is gonna fall a little bit short in the sense that Belling Big Welcome is quite powerful. So I would personally put it in like the regional deck, but kind of local level, just because a lot of people's non-engine in the format are randomly good against Lab. So it depends on what version you play. If you play more of a trap heavy version, I think it can definitely excel, but that's where I would currently put it at. Then you have like Mermail Lantern. I think a lot of people forget about this deck. This deck is quite powerful. It's still really strong, even in like the Master like meta. Like I thought I was gonna take this deck to World, so I gave it like a really long testing period, and I was like, wait a sec, this deck is super broken, still really toxic. Even without Dweller, it's still a really powerful deck, and it's without Dweller. And I believe it lost Bahamut Shark, if I'm not mistaken. So even without those cards, the deck is still quite powerful at doing what it wants to do. So I think that deck is a really strong engine deck. It can play Impulse, which is I feel like really strong in the meta game, into like Yugioh, Luna, Yummy. So I would say this deck is still like quite a solid deck. I think it's gonna fall short because it's never the most consistent deck, even though it plays a lot of engine cards, which is kind of ironic, but that's where I would kind of put it. Memento, I think it's gonna be kind of like in this category as well. I think the issue with Memento is I think it's probably one of the stronger top 6-4 decks, and I think maybe with the right pilot, it can make top 8 of a YCS. But the issue is that if you're playing more of a board breaker approach, you might be susceptible to like the Lunalight strategy. But Memento is a really strong deck that I played that kind of like grinded well against like Mitsu variants and all that sorts. So I actually think this deck is pretty good. But cards like Impulse hitting Memento Fusion and all that stuff is quite annoying. And they lost Moon, which was like one of the ways that it can like play around Impulse, is accessing the Feastsmith engine. So I would put it kind of like and definitely in like top 6-4. But I think that like maybe with the right pilot and a little bit of luck, you can definitely do really well. But I think this is a really strong deck that's consistently seen results, and won even like 2 YCs last year. So Heroes, definitely a locals deck, guys. I mean, it's just really not that great at the moment. Yeah, I mean, not much to say. I think the issue with Heroes is that like the card quality are really high, but because it's very xenophobic and it locks you into like the archetype, it's just that there's not really much else the deck can really do besides like the Dark Law, and the DP that we've seen. So yeah, I just don't think that the deck is really good in the meta, because it just doesn't have a lot of room for non-engine as well. So I think it's more of a locals fun deck. I think Snake Eyes is kind of interesting. Snake Eye Pearly, or even regular Snake Eye, I've seen it do well at some of the regionals. I know Rico's been playing it. I think this deck is interesting, and especially with 3 Ash, 3 Popular now, it can definitely be, come back to the metagame. Not like really heavily, but it's something that I would like to explore a little bit more, just because I think it's like a really cool deck. But I think regional is where I probably would take it to, because there still needs to be a lot tested with it, and I think so. I think regional is probably the chillest. I think Fire King is interesting. I would put it in like maybe top 64 for Wises. The reason being that I think the consistency for the deck is quite low, but I think Dinkabui's list is something to maybe try for the format. Being able to play cards like Impulse, and a lot of non-engine spots is definitely really strong in the format. And yeah, I think this is something that I would definitely explore. But I feel like Dracotail kind of does what Fire King does, and excels at it a little bit better. But yeah, I think I'll put it right here. Feeling Bell, same thing. Probably top 64 with the right luck, but I don't think it's that crazy. Goblin Biker Fiendsmith. This deck is interesting. I actually played a little bit of this deck. I tried it out, but because there aren't really that many XC strategies, it's gonna really kind of fall short. Because like some of the main decks right now, like Synchros, Fusions, like Fusion decks with Luna as well. So I don't really think it's gonna be that good. Maybe more locals per se. I think Rise of Fiendsmith is basically, it's still playable because you still have Exciton to access Requiem, but I just think that this deck has a lot of flaws at the moment, in the sense of like there's consistency issues, and then you have to decide between drawing the Fiendsmith or the Rizo cards. It like loses to Furos really hard, whereas I feel like a lot of these decks have really good game plans under Furos. So you think about Lunalight, they just put Liger under Fua. Yummy can make a really strong board under Fua. I know Triff talks about it all the time, where Fua doesn't really do much because it does do something, but the board is still like good enough to play in your opponent's turn, because you just like Synchro Summon your opponent's turn. Dragtail doesn't care about Fua at all. So, but yeah, I mean, all the issue with Rizo Fiendsmith is that like I feel like the best part about the Rizo deck is like the Rizo cards. So I don't really think Fiendsmith is that strong in the format. So I would put the Rise of Fiendsmith deck, and it was a heavy engine deck too, so you have some room for non-engine for sure, but I think from a deck wise perspective, I don't think it's engine. I think like the main part of this engine is gonna be the Riser core, so I think that's where it shines. So it's the same thing with the Riser Heraldic Beast. I think this is probably a little bit better because I feel like the X is so powerful, but losing X to 1 makes this deck I think not as good, so that's why I kind of have it in this category. Onomot Raizio, I would say, is still a little bit better. You have more rank 4 access, and doesn't rely on X, so I would put it at higher tier than like the Heraldic Beast. Malice Ignister, I feel like this deck is kind of slept on. It did lose Splash Mage, but I think you can deck build a little bit differently to maybe make it still more playable. The deck has a lot of non-engine spots, and I think like being able to play Impulse definitely puts it in a higher category for myself, so that's why I kind of like rate it kind of heavy. But I think the thing with the Malice deck is that like if Bystials are ever good in the meta game, this deck could be a good call because you can play Bystials that are both engine and non-engine, and so I think and also because Lances are out of people's side deck, it depends. If people play Lancey for Lunalight, then Malice gets hit in the crossfire, which makes this deck a little bit worse. So it just kind of depends. Yeah, the White Forge deck is definitely more of a regional deck from my perspective. Not a lot of non-engine. Still a really strong deck, but not a lot of non-engine. And I don't think engine for engine-wise, it's like stronger than the other ones we have. Blue Eyes Primate, probably in the regional deck list as well. I think the deck is good, just not at a YCS tier. It has a lot of weaknesses going second, but it's one of the strongest decks going first in the Yummies. Temple of the Kings got a lot worse in my opinion. I think it's definitely more of a locals deck. Mitsurugi Pier is definitely going to be one of the strongest deck in the upcoming format. You can play Impulse. The deck itself is naturally good into Yummy, and a lot of people are expected to play the Yummy deck at the moment. So I would say that the Mitsu deck is definitely one of the strongest decks in the game at the moment. And it can grind. I think that's what you're really looking for, like these type of like grind decks. So I would say that like that's gonna be one of the decks that are gonna be more of like the grindy decks. The deck that can. It also has like Wosu, which helps you out the Luna, like Liger Dancer. So I think the deck people play Impulse, searchable Kaiju out Luna like cards. It has like a decent amount of non-engine, but the engine itself is very powerful into boards, like through the form of Ami and Amino. Like I definitely think that deck is something definitely on my radar. And then something I would definitely consider playing for a YCS, especially from a top 8. So like if you're looking to like top 8 of a YCS, definitely I can definitely see it. Trying to get there. Red Genesis, I would say it's more of a locals deck. I was hesitant to put it at locals, but I still think the deck is like a little bit more decent than that. So I think that's where I would kind of place that. And then we're gonna have like some of these other decks. Like I think Live Twin Feastman is gonna be another regional deck. In my opinion, I'm gonna move myself down. That's gonna be another regional deck. Definitely not a bad deck per se, but I mean the Feastman cards definitely help carry this. But yeah, I think like if your opponent activates like Habakiri into the board, you just like blow up. So I don't really a fan of it. I think this Dirtbag deck is actually pretty cool. I learned how to play this deck through Master Duel, funny enough, and this deck can play Impulse, has a decent amount of non-engine. There's a bunch of board wipes, but the issue is the board wipe isn't really that good into some of these decks at the moment. Maybe it's like it's a little bit more decent than Yummy, but you know, I think like it's kind of like a fine deck. And without Miss at 3, I think it's a little bit worse because in Master we have Miss at 3, Fiendsmith. Don't really see the appeal of it. I think it's just too. I think it'll be a fun, cool locals deck, but definitely not something competitive. Gem Knights is definitely like a crazy deck at the moment. It did really well at the Nationals and Euros, Continentals, I mean. And it's a deck that I think is basically like a better 10-pie strategy. You're going to need some luck to go your way, but I think with the right luck, a deck can definitely do well. But it has some really high quality cards at the moment. To like OTK your opponent. You can play Shaddoll Fusions. Like, yeah, I think Gem Knight is definitely an insane deck. Necroz, I think probably more locals than anything. The only rituals at the moment deck that's good at the moment is definitely going to be the Mitsu deck. Orchid Fiendsmith, I would say kind of top 64. I think this deck has some potential, but because Moon is banned, I think this is a lot worse now, so I would put it down here. Dragon Maid is probably a regional deck as well. I've seen the Dragon Maid Dracoto deck, so that's kind of like where I would put it. Punk it has a decent amount of non-engine. I'll probably put it as regional. But the issue is, but it's kind of cool because Punk has a bridge to Fiendsmith still, which I think is the best variant to play, which is you do overlay 2 level 3s into the melody tune. So I think it's not bad. Monarch's probably more of a locals deck because, like, bro, like some people are going to play Droll for Mitsurugi. The Monarch deck just immediately crumbles. I think Brand is a decent top 64 deck as well. It has like some issues because Impulse is back in the metagame for some of these top decks. So I think it's going to fall a little bit short to that. But I think like Branded engine wise is strong into like, for example, Yummy. But I think it just has a bad Lunalight / Mitsurugi matchup because those decks can play Impulse. Archmage I think is a really cool regional deck. I played against it at locals the other day. I think this deck definitely has some potential. Definitely something I want to explore. I'll just put the K9 in the same spot. But I think K9 cards are a little bit worse. So I'll put K9 at locals level. I don't think the K9 cards are as good. Sky Striker I think can definitely do top 64 of YCS. I think the board breaker approach is strong at the moment, but I think it's going to fall short to some of these other decks like Lunalight. But I think Striker has a good Yummy matchup, decent Mitsurugi matchup, even decent Dracotail matchup. I think the Lunalight matchup is kind of scary for me, so that's why I put it at top 64 of the event. Revel bots, I'll be honest, I didn't really test this deck enough yet. I know they got new cards, so I'm gonna not rank it because I'm not sure. Branded Dracotail, I feel like it's a little bit worse than regular Dracotail, but I still think the deck is capable of doing well at an event, so I have it here. I took it to locals the other day and I really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot more. Definitely the deck needs a lot more innovation and improvement to make it a little bit better, but I think it has a lot of potential. So Dracotail K9, I think it's a lot worse than regular Dracotail because the K9 cards isn't that good in the metagame, so I would put it in top 64. I think pure Dracotail is a lot better. Maybe you side K9 cards. Pure K9 I think definitely has some potential here, but I think like I said because Izuna is not really that really good of a hand trap into like Yummy and into like for example Lunalight, I just don't think the deck is right there. There's also Dracotail Magistus. I can maybe see it being as good as regular Dracotail, like some version of these Dracotail decks, but yeah. True Draco, I'm gonna put it all the way down in locals tier, just because I think the True Draco deck isn't, it's basically just like Monarch, so I would say it goes in the same category. Cyber Dragon K9, I haven't really tried that out, but I figured because K9 cards are like a lot worse, it's a lot worse. Same with Vanquishal. K9 lost a lot of consistency, so it's really not that good. I think DDDs is more of a top 64 deck and maybe be a regional. The issue with DDDs though is that like a lot of people are not gonna know what your cards do. You might get some double loss, which might be unfortunate. But I think the cards are pretty high quality. Can play impulse, decent amount of like 15, 16 flex spots and 40. Overall, like definitely a solid deck with a lot of really good support. Cover card of like the Doom Dimension set either, so interesting. I haven't tested Rose Dragon or Psychic, so I'm not really sure how to comment on these. Magic-Storm, I don't think this is I don't think it can be a playable deck. I think it's more of a sub-engine and like Striker, so I would put it in the regional category. And then yeah, Goki I think is more locals. K9 Soulful Cord is more locals deck. Or I mean this deck can maybe have support. I think this deck the cards are pretty high quality, so maybe depending on like how the regionals results go, maybe I can, and like if I study this deck a little bit more, maybe I'll have a better input on this because I'm not really sure. But yeah, I think I have a couple decks down here that I didn't really rank because I'm not really sure where they would fall because I'm just not as familiar with these decks, so it's hard for me to give them a proper ranking. But I'm assuming they'll be in regionals or locals tier per se, just because. But who knows? Maybe one of these decks are going to be the goose. So I would probably not going to rank these because, like I said, it's kind of like up in the air. But I would say this is probably an accurate representation of what top 8/top 64 of a YSS looks like. You can basically see that with the new rules, less decks are going to make it into like the top cut of an event. Less rogue decks in general. You're going to see more meta definitely in top 8 of a YCS. Maybe that will change, but I think because you have to win so many additional rounds, the YCS top per se is definitely harder to obtain, so you're gonna be more likely to play meta decks per se. But of course, if you guys are interested in like your rogue decks or like your tier 2 decks, definitely consider playing them still if you enjoy them, because then you also have to enjoy the game. And I've went to many YCS where I just pick the deck I like instead of the best deck per se. And so but yeah, those are my overall thoughts. Let me know if you agree, disagree. Let me know where you think I should rank some of these decks down below. And your reasoning why. I'm curious to hear that. And yeah, of course, guys, if you guys are interested in some more content, definitely consider joining the inner circle. And yeah, I'd love to see you in there. So anyways, thank you for your time. I'll see you guys in the next one.